Brenda Davis, thank you so much for joining us again on the Plant Trainers podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
We would love to know what your moment of gratitude is for the world right now, this second round.
I hate to be political, but I am so grateful for the direction the election is going in right now. I mean, I'm grateful that that COVID isn't as bad as it could be, although I'm worried because it's not going in a good direction either. But I'm grateful that my family's safe, and we see my 82-year-old mom every day. And so that's a real blessing.
Yeah, the COVID situation is getting worse once again, and we hope that everybody who's listening is keeping safe and staying safe, and we're going to get through this. It's really about building immunity inside the body and protecting ourselves. And you know, there's a lot of talk about wearing masks and doing the physical prevention on the outside, but there's not a lot of talk about what we could do inside of our bodies to keep ourselves healthy and boost our immunity.
They've actually made laws to prevent us from talking about that in some circumstances.
Yeah, which is quite ridiculous when you've got people like David Katz writing about it, and people who are highly respected scientists, and there's no question that what we eat affects every system in our body. It affects our gastrointestinal system. It affects our cardiovascular system. Of course, it affects our immune system.
Yeah, and I think, talking about, the elderly, I think that right now amongst the plant-based community, the fear isn't that we might contract it and how we will react to it, but it's more we don't want to be responsible for the spread of it, right? For the spread of it. And I remember being in March or April and saying to our guests, because we were so far ahead on our podcast, let's not talk about COVID because by the time this comes out, it won't be a thing anymore. And here we are in November.
Yeah.
It's still very much a thing.
Definitely, definitely. So today we are going to be talking about pregnancy and birth and plant-based nutrition. And I knew that that you were the person to talk to because you were so detailed last time and had such amazing research and ways of explaining things when we were talking about the paleo diet versus vegan lifestyle, which so many people still have confusion about. And pregnancy is something that I think it's really important for people to understand the facts so that they can be comfortable and confident with the decisions that they make during their pregnancy, because for a lot of people, this is the first time in their lives where they're not just thinking about themselves. They have somebody else to think of, and an unformed body and undeveloped brain. We really need to make sure that we understand if this is safe, why it's safe, and what other bases we really do need to cover so that everybody in this situation can thrive.
It's not only that, though. We were in the same situation, not so much at pregnancy stage, but as our children were growing up, we weren't even sure if they should be plant-based or not, because we weren't sure if they were getting all the right nutrients or what they would be lacking if we did make that transition. And of course, eventually we did, because we learned what we needed to learn to be able to do that.
And how old are your children, may I ask?
They're now 12 and 10.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so they've been
That's such a great age.
Yeah, they've been plant-based now for 6-7 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it's fun when the parents call me up saying, what can I make my child for dinner? Because she'd like to be vegan for 30 days. And I know that it's the influence coming from our kids that is rubbing off
awesome.
on their friends. Yeah.
Well, I have two children as well. I have a daughter who will be 36 next month, and a son that just turned 33 on the 4th of November. And both are married. My daughter has two children, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I'm now in grandparenting mode, and it is just the most fun. I'm really appreciating the joys of grandparenthood.
Beautiful. Are your children plant-based as well?
My son is vegan and my daughter is not, but she's definitely vegetarian.
Great. Good. And that's, so then the kids have probably no problem eating when they come over to your house.
Oh, not at all. No, even my son-in-law, who's a complete omnivore, loves tofu and he loves all the food we make. So he's not an issue at all for him.
Perfect. So my question to start is, what do people really need to think about when they've kind of made up their mind, or they're on the fence, or not sure about having a vegan pregnancy, but their doctor tells them that they should really eat fish throughout it, or they should really add eggs in to it? How do people kind of come to the fact that it's okay to be plant-based, or even back it up a bit? Is plant-based pregnancy something that can be recommended and something that can be completely safe?
Yes, and I think one of the best resources really is the 2016 position statement of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the largest dietetic nutrition organization on the planet, and they have a position statement that very clearly states that well-planned vegetarian and vegan diets are safe and adequate at every stage of the life cycle, including pregnancy and lactation. And of course, the operative words are well-planned. And so what does that entail? And unfortunately, most of our nutrition education materials are directed towards omnivores. And so people that want to be vegan and do it well need to take responsibility for getting accurate information. And that's kind of what my career has been about, to help them with that chore, and writing Becoming Vegan and Becoming Vegetarian, and now Nourish. That's really the focus. I desperately want every single human being that can see the powerful benefits of choosing plant-based for themselves and beyond themselves, to be able to do so brilliantly for themselves and their families. We are in, and the older it seems we get, the more conscious, the more critical, the more vital this all becomes. And I just desperately want for there to be something left for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we're not going in a good direction. And in many respects, so many people are trying to emulate what, the Western world has done food-wise. And we need to be going in a very different direction. And so I can remember in, was it 2014 or something like that, I was speaking at a conference in Spain that was a dietetic conference, I think represented by dietitians from over 50 countries around the world. And after my lecture, I had people from Spain stand up. It was being hosted in Spain, and say, well, this one lady said, well, we can see it's possible to do this for adults, but you can't be suggesting that this is okay for children. A purely plant-based diet, that would just result in malnutrition. And it just kind of broke my heart. I said very strongly, I said, if you see a case of malnutrition in a plant-based child, the responsibility for that lies squarely on your shoulders. Because as health professionals, we need to have guidelines. We need to have easy, guidelines for parents to follow. They need to know that when they go to their health practitioner, they will get the kind of support they need to succeed. And if you tell them they can't do it, where do you think they'll go? What kind of information will they get? We've known for years that this can be done well. And it's time that we as health professionals take responsibility for helping people do so. And I think that's, all health professionals need to get educated enough so that they can support people who are making a choice that will benefit all of us. Do make that choice without having to risk the health of their family.
And I agree completely. And I don't believe that all doctors will have the time or the drive or the understanding of how important it is for them to get properly educated on nutrition, and not just because they've watched, a rerun of a daytime doctor show or something like that, because
Yep.
I hear so many times saying, oh, I was completely plant-based, but my doctor suggested that I put some eggs and fish back in my diet for healthy fats and omega to help the baby throughout. So when your doctor makes that suggestion, what do you say to them in a respectful way? Do you ask them to look up that study? Do you print up the study that you mentioned earlier? How can we have a proper conversation with our doctor to at least get their blessing? Because I think that people need that, because you don't want to spend 9 months worrying in the back of your head.
No. And so the paper that I was talking about is definitely not a study. It's a position statement. And a position statement is an evidence-based report based on all the studies that have ever been done. So it's looking at the evidence and coming up with guidelines. And so these kinds of position statements are very much well regarded by the medical community. And so providing a copy of that for them, and then saying, I totally understand your concerns, because we do need, more protein. We need more iron. We need more choline. We need more, we need more of a lot of nutrients during pregnancy. And so I am very committed to a plant-based diet, but I'm also committed to having a very healthy baby. And so here's what I plan to do. So for the essential fatty acids, the long-chain omega-3s I would get from fish, I'm going to take 300 milligrams of EPA DHA a day with at least 200 milligrams of DHA included in the supplement every day. That's about the amount a person might get if they eat fish twice or 3 times a week. For eggs, choline is one of the nutrients of concern that people think adding eggs will do the trick. And it's no question, eggs are a very rich source of choline. But soy products are actually a pretty good source of choline too. And I know I need, 450 milligrams a day during my pregnancy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my prenatal does include choline and iodine. And I'm going to be, eating more of the choline-rich plant foods that, if a person can, sort of explain to their health practitioner exactly what they're going to do to ensure they meet those nutritional requirements, I think the health practitioner would rest more easily, because that health practitioner, all they care about really is that your baby's healthy. They want you to have a healthy baby. And so based on their knowledge and what they've learned in medical school and so on, they're thinking, well, you need omega-3s for the brain growth. They're thinking you need protein, you need choline, you need B12. And so those are the things that are really an issue for them. And so if you can kind of, calm their fears by providing concrete steps that you're going to take to avoid any of those issues, that will help a lot.
And what if somebody is thinking right now, well, I've heard that the omegas, when they're plant-based, aren't going to formulate properly in my body. They are not going to be, they're not going to break down properly. Then how do we respond to that?
Oh, well, and there's a point there. What they're talking about is they're talking about the plant omega-3s, which are actually called alpha-linolenic acid. Alpha-linolenic acid in your body gets slowly converted, elongated, and desaturated into these bigger, more biologically active omega-3s called EPA, or eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, or docosapentaenoic acid, or docosahexaenoic acid. And then there's this DPA in the middle, which is docosapentaenoic acid. But anyway, so what basically the concern is about that conversion. 2 things. One is that the people that convert the most efficiently are actually women of childbearing age, because the body knows it needs to convert. There was a study done in England showing a conversion rate of about 36% to either EPA, DPA, or DHA, which is really quite shocking because normally we think of conversion rate being, 10% at most. So we are converting a little better during pregnancy. But the other thing to know is these long-chain omega-3s from fish, the EPA and DHA, the fish get most of their EPA and DHA from plants in the sea at some point along the food chain. So basically, those plants can actually be cultured and grown, and then the omega-3s can be extracted from those plants, put in supplement form, and that DHA and EPA in a vegan supplement is identical to the EPA and DHA in fish. It's where it comes from. So there's no difference at all between the long-chain omega-3s from microalgae and the long-chain omega-3s from fish. Fish get their long-chain omega-3s from those microalgae, and at some point along the food chain, they eat smaller fish that ate smaller fish that ate smaller fish. So certainly what I would recommend in terms of omega-3 fatty acids is to do that, 300 milligram or so EPA DHA supplement a day, and microalgae, vegan, and not worry about it. I mean, you'll definitely boost your levels. The one thing we do know is vegans do have lower levels of EPA and DHA in their blood if they're just relying on plant omega-3s. But if they're including the preformed EPA and DHA, then they boost their levels to, what we would see in fish-eating omnivores, and it's just not an issue.
So planning it out and being able to explain that to your practitioner becomes very important in the whole process. You mentioned the term guide or guidelines before, and I need to pivot here for a second because over the past year, we've been given these new documents from the Ministry of Health in Canada, and the food guide has updated itself. And I'd like to get your take on how the updates have affected our population, because we're looking at a guide. We want guidance in eating the right foods, and they've turned Canada's food guide to be a little more plant-based, and they've used that terminology, which is a huge advancement. And I know our American friends are far behind us there, but I wanted to get your take on the updates and changes in Canada's food guide, if you will.
Oh, well, this is, it's... it was time to put on our party hats for sure when the food guide was released. There's no question. I think Canada was one of the first countries to sort of separate industry influence on the guides and use science as the foundation. And also, I think we were one of the first countries to actually factor in things like the diversity of our population. And when you think about people from certain nations, could be 80 or 90% of them lactose intolerant, and to have a guide that mandates the consumption of a food that they won't tolerate very well is it's essentially racist. And so I think it's really important to recognize that cultural diversity in our country. And I think Health Canada did a very brilliant job. I know there are concerns about, well, now how are people going to ensure they get enough calcium if, dairy's not there or any of the alternatives. But certainly it's not that difficult to, figure out how to get your calcium from the variety of foods that are offered. And for those of you that aren't aware, Canada's food guide used to be for food groups in the olden days when I first started practicing dietetics. And it was sort of half plants, half fruits and vegetables and grains, and half meat and dairy products. And then we ended up with this rainbow looking food guide, but still meat and dairy were very front and center. And our new food guide is a plate, half of which is fruits and vegetables, a quarter of which is whole grains, and another quarter of which is protein-rich foods with a sort of an emphasis on the plant-based protein choices as being preferred. And so to follow Canada's food guide as a vegan now is actually pretty simple. And instead of the glass of milk, it's a glass of water, and there's no longer a separate dairy group. Dairy is part of that protein group. You can see a little bit of yogurt and cheese there, but essentially it's not considered absolutely essential. You don't have to consume 3 servings a day or 2 or 3 servings a day. So it's a very, very different guide. And I'll tell you, the rest of the world is sitting up and taking notice.
Yep.
Do you think that we have seen any changes? And I'll piggyback on this for a while, and then we'll go back to the pregnancy after. But do you think that we've seen any changes over this past while since those changes were made in terms of the medical system, or how many people are coming in sick, or are people reversing type 2 diabetes, or have we seen any changes in our health since starting this?
I'm not sure that we've seen huge changes in what people are actually eating yet. And I think it's going to take time for it to trickle down into actual food consumption patterns changing. And until that happens, we won't see the advantages to reduce risk of chronic disease. But I think that will come. And as our nutrition education materials start to transition, and those materials are being used more by health care providers, I think it will happen, but it will take some time.
I agree. What I see with clients, what I see as a parent, and what I know having been a teacher, kindergarten teacher for 15 years, I really think that it's going to take a generation or two, because even my children's health has not really changed. That those health projects that they're doing around food didn't change very quickly, right? They need to get new materials. They need to think of new materials. Mm-hmm. They need to be reminded that the food guide has actually changed. And I think that we're used to what we do. So people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, the chances of them changing are smaller as a big cohort. But when our kids learn that this is the way it should be done, and they start to take control in the kitchen, that's when we're going to start to see big changes. But at least it's done, and it's amazing.
Process. It's a process. It's going to take a bit of time. And I'm seeing changes happening in the high school level. So it's starting to infiltrate. I know it's only been a year, but it's starting. You're starting to see a difference, and I think it's just going to take time. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hop back into the pregnancy. And we were just talking about choline, and we were talking about calcium and protein and all of that. So, and omegas. Let's talk for a second about why somebody who's pregnant and or maybe not pregnant would want to choose a plant-based source of those nutrients as opposed to fish or eggs.
Well, I would say, first of all, that when you choose whole plant foods as your primary source of nutrition, there are 2 things that you want to consider. What you're getting and sort of what you're avoiding in the process. And so what you're getting fiber with everything you eat. Which helps with a healthy gut microbiome. And that is so critical to your baby's health and to long-term health. You're getting more phytochemicals, you're getting more antioxidants. So it'll be a boost in terms of your levels of oxidative stress and your levels of inflammation. All of those things are really important as you're growing a new little human being. And then the other thing is that when you avoid the animal products, there's a lot of things that are not necessarily desirable that you're helping to avoid. And one of those things, surprisingly, maybe not so surprisingly, but is persistent organic pollutants. So a lot of the pollutants that are neurotoxins and can be quite damaging to a baby move up the food chain. And in fish, we see, of course, heavy metals as well, but persistent organic pollutants, fish is one of the most concentrated sources of those things. And so if you can get the essential fatty acids that are one of the perks of fish without having to consume the fish, I think that's an actual safer choice during pregnancy. And so, even things like TMAO production. Fish is one of the few foods that you get TMAO from directly without it having to be converted to TMAO by your gut bacteria and then your liver conversions. And so I think avoiding those things is actually a pretty good thing. Generally, I think there are really good arguments for getting your nutrients from plants as opposed to animals.
And I agree. And that's what I try to teach people a lot when they say, yes, but we can get all these good things. But is it worth it? Right? Is it worth it with what else is coming along with it? Especially since food is really not what it used to be, right?
No,
it's not our grandmother's eggs, and it's not our grandmother's fish, for sure.
No. Although I have to say, as an ethical vegan, I can say with absolute conviction that fish and eggs are not necessary for a healthy pregnancy. And of course, from an ethical and an ecological perspective, I can say absolutely there are better ways of getting your protein and iron and zinc and essential fatty acids and all of those things, and even your choline. However, we can't really say that fish and eggs are necessarily harmful during pregnancy, and that's a distinction which I think is important to make. There are a lot of women in blue zones and in that have super healthy babies that do include fish and eggs in their diet. We, from an ethical perspective, we would rather not see that, but it is absolutely possible to have a very healthy pregnancy and include those foods. And for people that do, if you are eating fish, you definitely want to be really cautious about heavy metals. And so there is a whole long list of fish that pregnant women should not be eating. And there's a whole long list of fish that is recommended you don't eat more than once a month. And all of those things you really need to be aware of. And then with eggs, if you are eating eggs, I mean, you definitely want to be getting, if possible, from a farmer that and what the chickens are being fed and all of that. So I think just to be balanced, just because a person is using some of those foods doesn't mean they're not going to have a healthy pregnancy, because of course so many women do.
Definitely. And the source, if you do choose to, knowing the source is definitely key. And, we love to acknowledge balance, and we love to meet people where they are. And I think that that's a really important piece of information for people should they choose to continue to eat that. Now, within the plant-based lifestyle, there are different types of lifestyles as well. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the raw diet. And there's a lot of back and forth about whether this is healthy or not overall, but especially when we're pregnant. If somebody is raw before and doing well and thriving, if somebody decides, okay, I want to have the healthiest diet possible, I'm going to go raw now for the best pregnancy. What do people need to know? What do they need to be aware of? And what do they really need to consider?
Yeah, so in terms of 100% raw food diets, they're probably the most therapeutic diets on the planet. They are so clean. There's no processed foods. They're super high in all of these phytochemicals and antioxidants, and so powerful diets for reversing diabetes and heart disease and so on. But during pregnancy, our number one goal becomes ensuring adequate growth and development in our fetus, and we want to have a healthy baby. And there are definitely, in my view, reasons to be concerned about doing 100% raw, especially in terms of if you're one of those people that's not very keen on supplements. You definitely need 100% raw diet. Does not provide the vitamin B12. It often doesn't provide the iodine. It doesn't provide the vitamin D, and most of us don't have that kind of access to sunshine to rely on sunshine solely for vitamin D. There are several nutrients, even iron. It's hard to meet the RDA without a supplement. So I would say what my recommendation would be if somebody's really keen on raw is to do high raw, not 100% raw. And I would add in cooked legumes and some grains as well, but, and starchy vegetables as sort of what you're adding in, but especially legumes, because it tends to be challenging to get enough protein, iron, and zinc without legumes. And the thing is that on a raw diet, the protein is already on the low side. During pregnancy, our protein needs increase from 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight to 1.1. It's an almost 50% increase in our protein needs. And for a lot of women, that brings us from about 50 or 60 grams a day to about 70 or 80 plus grams a day. And on a raw food diet, that is not easy to achieve. So I would say add the lentils, a bowl of lentil soup with your big, huge salad. You're just even in your breakfast bowl, some lentils. I add lentils in my breakfast bowl on a regular basis. So you definitely want to add in those legumes.
I want to talk about your book in a moment, but before we do, I think it would be silly to avoid this question and not ask it. But is there the pros and cons versus breastfeeding, using animal milk, or using a plant-based milk for the infant? What are the thoughts on those three compared to each other?
Yeah, so that's an important question, because a really important question. So obviously, I think everybody, I don't think anybody that has any knowledge of this subject area would argue that every species, the milk of their mother is the best milk for them. And it's really specifically designed for that species. So the milk of a cow is designed to turn a little 60-pound, calf into a whatever 300 or 400-pound cow within very short order. And so it's designed to do that, and it has a very different composition than does dog milk or cat milk or human milk or rat milk, or each mammal has a milk that is very specifically designed for the optimal growth and development of their offspring. There's nothing to compare it to breast milk, nothing. If you can't breastfeed your baby and you have a possibility of using human milk from a milk bank or whatever, that obviously would be your best choice. So if you had cancer previously and had a double mastectomy and you can't breastfeed, for most people, breastfeeding is doable, and you can get support from a lactation consultant, something like that if you have any concerns. Other than that, generally what is recommended by the pediatric societies and the people that are making the recommendations on these things are for omnivorous or lacto-ovo-vegetarian parents, you would feed a cow's milk based formula. For vegans, you would feed a soy-based infant formula. And when people look at the labels and they start to read the type of sugars and the the high fructose corn syrup or whatever, the regular corn syrup, and the type of protein and the type of fat, with the oils they're using, and they look at the ingredients and they think, this is just like Boost or Ensure with a bunch of vitamins and minerals added. I don't want to feed my baby that. And what I have to say to you is, at this point in time, there are no alternatives, period. If you cannot breastfeed and you cannot acquire human breast milk, as a vegan parent, you must use soy-based infant formula. There is a pea-based formula for toddlers when toddlers don't really need formula. So that isn't, and maybe they'll start to come up with better formulations as the years go by. But right now, when we look through the literature and look at those instances of severe malnutrition in children who are being raised vegan, almost all of them can be traced back to homemade infant formula. And, some of these formulas had 17 to 20 calories per 100 mils. Breast milk has 70. So these children, some of them died. And people, what do they blame it on? What do you think they blame it on? They blame it on the vegan diet. If an omnivorous parent made a homemade formula and it was grossly inadequate and the baby died, would they blame an omnivorous diet? The reality is we need to nourish babies properly, and at this point in time, it doesn't make sense to take that kind of risk on your child. We know at least the soy-based formula has everything that a baby needs to thrive, and so that is the only suitable alternative to human breast milk for vegan parents.
Thank you for answering that. And right now my heart is crying a little bit because although I did breastfeed both children, I did need a lot of supplementation with the second one due to stress, anxiety, and not being able to have her on me 24 hours a day like she wanted to. And of course we weren't plant-based at the time, but it does, yes, there might be some ingredients in that soy-based one that are not desirable, but people hearing that is the best choice. And then when we do start our kids on solids, to just, go in with a whole food plant-based diet straight from the beginning, not give them access to the sugars, extra sugars, salts, and oils to get their palates used to that, and keep their diet as clean as possible moving forward. And sometimes we do need to do what we need to do to get past a point, and then we always have our next choices in life to make. So thank you for those answers.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I think it's just really important for parents to remember that as they're feeding a young child, that fat is absolutely critical. Breast milk is over 50% of calories from fat. Formula is over 50% of calories from fat. You do not want to do a low-fat vegan diet for a growing child. Fat is important for every cell membrane. It's important for brain growth. It's important for every body system. And that doesn't mean you need to be pouring oil on the food, but it does mean you need to provide good sources of fat. For babies, it would be nut and seed butters and creams, and you can use tofu, you can use avocado. There are lots of good sources of fat, and don't be afraid of feeding nuts and seeds to an infant in terms of not you don't want to feed nuts and seeds, they could choke on it, but nut and seed butters and creams. Because what we've been learning is that whereas we used to tell parents to avoid any potential allergens till a child was 1 or 2 years of age. I need a drink of water. I've got something caught in my throat.
No problem. A red water bottle, of course.
A red water bottle, yeah. So basically, where was I?
Feed them. Don't be afraid to feed them nuts, seeds, and creams.
Yes, exactly. Because obviously nuts and seeds in the whole form are a choking hazard, but the butters and creams, we used to think that you shouldn't feed babies these foods till they were, especially if they were a high risk for allergy, till they were at least a year or two for high allergy risk children. And now what we've been learning, especially with the peanut allergy research, is that the earlier a child is actually introduced to peanut protein, the lower the risk of developing an allergy. And it was interesting how this was even discovered, but it was discovered in a population that introduced naturally peanuts to infants, and they had almost no peanut allergies in their country. And it was just it was just so surprising that research started to be done. And now we realize now for very high risk children with a lot of ectopic, eczema, those kinds of things, then greater caution is warranted, and you need to work with a pediatrician to determine exactly how to do it. But generally, you're wanting to introduce these things to children at a fairly early stage. And because we don't start feeding children until they're 6 months of age, that's the recommendation now. It's not like when you started at, years ago, we'd start at two months feeding solid foods. Now that they're 6 months, they can consume a lot of different textures and flavors and all sorts of foods at a fairly early stage once they've started solids.
Brenda, so much great information, and a lot of this information that we're talking about today can be found in your new book called Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families that you wrote. There it is. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the cover. You wrote that book with Dr. Reshma Shah, who was on our podcast episode 379, who shared a bit of information about that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the book that's coming out on the same day that this podcast will be dropping. So if you're listening to the show, the book is now available, and we'll link to it in our show notes.
Well, it's actually, this is my 12th book, and every one was precious to me. This book is especially precious because it's filling a void that there just isn't a book that provides a comprehensive set of guidelines for parents and for people that are wanting to raise a family with a plant-based diet. And we cover everything. We talk about the reasons, the health reasons and ecological, environmental and ethical reasons for making this choice. And we go into macronutrients and micronutrients, and then we go through all the stages of growth, pregnancy and lactation and infancy and toddlers and childhood and adolescence. And we go through all of that. And then we spend a lot of time talking about relationships around food and the importance of the family table and how to deal with all sorts of challenges that might arise with picky eaters or eating disorders or overweight or all of those issues. And then we've got a wonderful section on sort of all the practical challenges of doing, well, I guess I shouldn't even say challenges, just the practical tools you need to make this fun and wonderful, joyful kind of way of eating. And then we have a bunch of wonderful, I think probably close to 50 recipes. I'm not exactly sure how many, but certainly we've got a good number of great recipes for the family to finish the book off. So I'm very excited. And, this is my first book with Dr. Reshma Shah. And what a joy it was to write this with her. She's just the most balanced person, and she comes from a background of being Jane herself, and when she was young, and then went off and did the omnivorous thing, and then came back to it as she was starting to raise a family, and it was a real joy to do this with a pediatrician with that kind of knowledge. So. Yeah, I'm excited about this book.
It is a gorgeous book, and from the cover, but also the inside as well. I love how the chapters are laid out. I want to ask you how you met her and how you decided to work with her.
Oh, well, it's amazing. I was on a plane. I met a friend in San Francisco. We were on our way down to the Plantbased Project. I was speaking at their annual conference, and we actually, my friend Lily and I took the window seat, she took the aisle seat, thinking we'll have the middle seat free and we'll be able to put all our stuff there. We'll have the whole row to ourselves. And then the plane's almost loaded and Reshma gets on and sits right in between us. And so I thought, well, I'll just start talking to her. And it turned out she was on her way to the same conference. And so we talked the whole way, and then we met again the next year, and we kind of just, she did a presentation at her hospital, and I helped her a little bit with that. And then I remember her saying, I want to do more. I just want to do more. And I said, well, if you want to do more, what we really need is a book for families and children. And she said, I'll do it if you'll help me.
Well, and now you have a very comprehensive guide for families, helping them with their plant-based nutrition. And I think a lot of people will definitely benefit from the book that's now available. Again, it's called Nourish, and it's available starting the day this is coming out. And we'll link to it in our show notes at planttrainers.com. Good.
Thank you.
So Brenda, if people want to reach out and connect with you, where would be the best place for them to go?
Brenda Davis, rd.com is my website. My email is brendadavis@telus.net. And then we also have a book website, nourishthebook.com.
Yeah, we're going to link to all that.
Oh, and Facebook. I always, people can connect with me on Facebook. I'm going to be close to that 5,000 friends soon. But what I do is I always check to see if they're if I don't know them, I check to make sure they're plant-based, and then I want to be their friend. So I'm happy to be friends with people.
We will put all those links in the show notes at planttrainers.com so people can get the book and get more information and reach out to you. Thank you so much once again for joining us on the show. You always have so much great knowledge, information, and it's always so much fun talking to you. And we haven't seen you in person in a while, so hopefully soon we'll be able to connect once all this COVID gets over with, then we'll be back at those conferences. So thank you. Thank you, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to see you again.
You too. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You too.